Baltimore sleeps the way the Chesapeake sleeps. Not deeply, not fully, but with one eye open and both ears turned toward the water. By 4 in the morning, the water taxis have docked, the white tablecloths folded, the candles drowned. What remains smells like salt off the Patapsco River and diesel from the overnight routes on Pratt Street. The cobblestones on Thames Street hold the cold the way old stone does, releasing it slowly back into the air long after the rain has stopped. Baltimore, more than 4:40, does not sleep. It waits. Khalil Vance was not supposed to be on Thames Street at this hour. He was supposed to be in his car heading north on I-83, the James Beard dinner behind him. He had shaken every hand in the room and said the right things about culinary vision and the future of mid-Atlantic food. But when the dinner ended and the valet brought his car, Khalil sat with his hands on the wheel and did not start the engine. 4 minutes. He counted them. Then he gave the valet the keys and walked toward the water. He turned onto Thames Street with no particular destination, his jacket open at the collar, the harbor black, and still to his left. From somewhere ahead, something sweet, something baked and warm, rising up from the dark. The sign above the door was small and hand-lettered. Ose's. The lights inside were on. Not the amber glow of a restaurant trying to be noticed, but the hard,
Chuẩn bị món
clean
cá hồi.
brightness of a kitchen in actual use. The kind
Sốt
of
đã
light
sẵn
that
sàng.
means someone has been
Đưa đĩa
awake
đây.
for a long time and plans to keep being awake. Khalil stopped. Through the glass, faintly fogged where the warmth inside met the cold outside, he could see a woman standing at a large wooden work surface. She was focused in a way that shuts everything else out. Not performed concentration, the real kind. Her hands were moving, and what her hands were doing made Khalil Vance, who had eaten in 40 countries and built a restaurant group profiled in 6 national publications, step closer to a storefront window at 4 in the morning in Fells Point, like a man who has just heard a piece of music he did not know existed. She was pulling sugar. The technique requires 5 to 8 years of consistent practice and an understanding of heat that no classroom can teach. Fewer than 2% of working pastry chefs in the United States can execute it at a professional level. The petals she was forming were the color of amber. She made them without hesitation. Khalil moved closer to the glass, and then he saw her hands. The skin on the backs of her hands, from the knuckles all the way to the wrists, was marked by scar tissue, the kind that pulls tight and carries its history permanently. These were not small scars. These were the record of something that had tried to take those hands from her and failed. Because those hands were pulling amber petals out of sugar at 4 in the morning with a precision that moved something in Khalil's chest that he did not have a name for. He lifted his hand and knocked on the glass. She did not look up. He knocked again. She still did not look up, not because she had not heard, but because at this hour in this kitchen, there was nothing outside the glass worth what her hands were doing. Here is the question this story is going to ask you. What does a man do when he finally sees the hands that have been feeding him and realizes he never once asked whose hands they were? Stay with me, because this story is not about bread. It is about what we build in the dark when no one is watching, and about what it costs when someone is watching and still looks away. What Khalil Vance did not know, standing on that wet sidewalk, was that he had been there before. Not on that sidewalk, but on the other side of a window like this one, in a warm room, being served something made by hands he never saw and a name he never learned. 8 years ago, in a different restaurant, on a night when those hands were carrying something no one at the table had thought to ask about. If you have ever stood outside looking in, at a life, at a kind of strength you could not name but recognized the moment you saw it, stay with me. I am going to tell you everything. To understand the woman behind that glass, you have to understand where she came from. Brianna Osei trained at a culinary institute and graduated near the top of her class. At 28, she was hired into the kitchen of Beaumont, a fine dining restaurant in Harbor East, the only woman in the pastry section and the only black woman in the kitchen. Within 4 months, the executive pastry chef, a Haitian man named Augustin who had trained in Lyon and had patience for very little, called her into his office and told her she had the finest instinct for sugar work he had seen in 30 years of professional kitchens. He said it once. He did not need to say it again. That was also the year she met Jerome. Jerome Osei was not a complicated man, and he would have told you so himself with a smile that meant he considered it a compliment. He worked as an electrician and was a deacon at Sharp Street Memorial United Methodist Church. He was tall and unhurried and had a habit of being exactly where he said he would be at exactly the time he said he would be there. He asked her out twice before she said yes. The third time, he simply showed up and said he would wait. She made him wait 45 minutes. He waited. There are 4 things you should know about Jerome Osei, because the story of Brianna can't be told without them. The first, every morning he made coffee for both of them, and every morning he let his own go cold. Not because he forgot, but because the moment he set down his cup, he would find himself watching Brianna work, and the coffee would cool, and he would not notice until she pointed at it for the third time. He never corrected the habit. The second, every time Brianna hummed while she worked, old hymns mostly, things she had learned so young they lived in her body rather than her memory, Jerome would stop and listen. He called it church time. That's church, baby, right there in our kitchen. The third, he did not understand pastry. He admitted this freely. But whenever Brianna made something new, he would eat it slowly and sit quietly and then say exactly one thing, baby. That one has a story in it. No elaboration. She always knew what he meant. The fourth, in the last week of his life when speech had become difficult, said, Brianna, don't you dare hide those hands. You hear me? Don't you dare. She held his hand and nodded and looked at the window because she could not look at his face. She has never repeated those words to anyone, not to Tobias. Jerome was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer in February, on the 13th, a Tuesday afternoon. He called Brianna at the restaurant at 2 o'clock. She told him she would be home by 11. She went back to work. The dessert course at Beaumont that night was a composition she had been developing for 3 weeks. Compressed Bosque pear with cardamom foam and pulled sugar petals in amber. She plated 6 of them that evening. She could not say what Jerome had told her that afternoon. She did not know how to say it yet, but she could put it somewhere. She put it in the sugar, in the way the petals curved, in the amber she had worked until it held the light the right way. She put everything she could not yet speak into the thing her hands already knew how to do. She did not know that a man at table 7 ordered the tasting menu that night. She was already breaking down her station by the time that table signed their check. Jerome died 14 months later. Tobias was 5 years old. 6 months after Jerome's funeral, Brianna was standing in front of a Vantage XT900 commercial convection oven during a dinner service at Beaumont when the heating element failed. A pressure spike, superheated steam expelled without warning. She was burned across both hands, both forearms. 2nd degree. The surgeons told her the scar tissue would limit her range of motion permanently. She spent 4 months proving them wrong. Beaumont did not call her back. The restructuring of the kitchen, they said. Vantage's insurance carrier offered $45,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. Her lawyer told her to take it. She took it because Tobias needed to eat. She built OCs on Thames Street with second-hand equipment, and 3 tables she refinished herself. Jerome's photo went up on the first day. His collection plate from Sharp Street stayed on the shelf beside it. Every February, on the 13th, after Tobias was asleep, she went into the back kitchen and made it again. The compressed pear, the cardamom foam, the pulled sugar petals in amber. She made it and looked at it and then took it apart and started over. A ritual, a conversation with someone who could no longer answer in words. She did not know that the man who had eaten that dessert 8 years ago, at table 7 on the night of February 13th, was going to walk past her window at 4 in the morning. She did not know, when he knocked on the glass and she did not look up, that the window between them had already been there for 8 years. She was just making the petals, because her hands knew how. On the shelf at home, there was a small blue notebook. Tobias had started keeping it the year he turned 8. He called it his recipe book, though it contained no recipes. It contained observations, written in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old paying attention to things adults had stopped noticing. One entry read, Mama made sugar into Yule flowers tonight. I asked why she made them. She said sometimes you make something beautiful just because beautiful is enough. I wrote this down because I want to remember it. Khalil Vance had not cooked for an audience in 4 years. What he did instead, what no one on his staff knew about, was come into the Harbor East kitchen alone on Sunday mornings, put on a faded canvas apron that had belonged to his grandmother, and cook the food he had grown up eating. Sweet potato with too much butter, collard greens low and slow, cornbread measured by eye. The apron had belonged to his grandmother on Presbury Street in Sandtown, Winchester. Washed, sometimes its original color had become a matter of speculation. He had grown up in Sandtown, Winchester, 4 miles from Harbor East and another world entirely. He had left at 19 with a culinary scholarship and had not gone back in any meaningful sense since. He sent money to his mother every month. He had not been inside her house in 3 years. He had made something of himself by leaving, and he had told himself this so many times he had stopped noticing he was telling it. The morning after the James Beard dinner, he described the technique to his head pastry chef, Simone, who had staged in Copenhagen and did not impress easily. She set down her coffee. That's not someone who took a weekend class. That's someone who trained at a serious level and fell off the map. He found OCs on Instagram, 340 followers, no website, 4.9 stars across 23 reviews. He went Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. ordered something different each day. On Thursday afternoon, Brianna came out from behind the counter and stood in front of him. "You're Khalil Vance," she said. "Not a question. I know who you are. What do you want?" Before he could answer, the front door opened and Curtis Hale walked in. Khalil had asked Hale to draw up a revised equipment spec sheet. Hale was 52, VP of Sales at Vantage Commercial Kitchen Supply, a man built for conference rooms. He wore a tie and his handshake communicated something beyond greeting. He looked at Brianna once briefly and looked away. "Mr. Vance, the updated specs for the XT series installation. 18-month warranty on all heating elements. Industry-leading safety ratings across the line." He smiled. "You're in good hands." Khalil took the folder. Hale left. The bell above the door rang once and went quiet. Brianna had not moved. She was watching the door where Hale had been. There was something in her stillness that had not been there 30 seconds before, more internal, more braced. "So," she said, turning back. "What do you want?" he told her. "A consulting partnership. She would design and lead the pastry program for Harbor East. Name the compensation." She listened without expression. Then, "I'm done with restaurant kitchens," she said it the way people state facts about geography. He put his card on the counter. She did not touch it. He left. Tobias watched the door close. Then he opened his blue notebook and wrote, "Today a man came in 3 times and bought 3 different things. I don't think he came for the pastry. I think he came to look at Mama. I don't know yet if that is good or bad." The dinner that evening was rice and red beans. Tobias knew what that meant and did not ask about it. They ate without talking. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a bus swept its lights across the ceiling. Tobias set his spoon down. "Mama, you make the sugar flowers at night, after I go to sleep. Every year on February 13th. I know because I see the light under the kitchen door." He paused. "Who do you make them for?" The room went very quiet. "I make them because I need to," Brianna said finally. Tobias nodded the way Jerome used to nod when he understood something and had decided not to push. He raised his bowl and went to do his reading. That Sunday at Sharp Street Memorial, the sermon was not about bread. But somehow it was. That evening, Brianna sat at the kitchen table with Khalil's card in front of her and her hands flat on either side of it. She soaked them every night. Warm water, lotion, 15 minutes of movement working the scar tissue before it stiffened. The wrench of scar tissue left unmaintained was what she imagined regret felt like in the body, something that hardened if you did not keep moving it. "Don't you dare hide those hands." She had made the flowers for Jerome. She had made them in the dark because the dark felt like the only safe place left. And the question she had not let herself ask until this particular evening, with this card on the table and Tobias's questions still in the room, was whether safe and hidden had become the same thing, and whether Jerome had been trying to warn her about exactly that. She picked up the card. She did not call that night. She called the next morning before Tobias woke, standing in the kitchen with her coffee while it was still hot. "This is Brianna Osei. I will do one consultation, no commitment. I want to see the kitchen first." She did not call because she trusted Khalil Vance. She called because Jerome had told her not to hide those hands, and because a 9-year-old boy had asked who she was making the flowers for, and because the sermon that Sunday had not been about bread but had somehow been about bread, and because there are mornings when everything you have been carrying decides, without asking your permission, that it is ready to be set down. The Harbor East kitchen was not finished. Half the equipment was still in transit, crating along the east wall. The floor was granite, pale and unforgiving, and the overhead lights showed everything without mercy. Khalil was already there, wearing the canvas apron, not the embroidered linen ones on the rack by the door. The old one, the faded one with the stain at the hip that no washing had ever resolved. He had not planned to be wearing it when she arrived. Brianna looked at the apron. She looked at the smear of butter or flour on his forearm. She did not say anything. But something in the set of her shoulders changed fractionally. She moved through the kitchen methodically. Clearances, cold storage temperature, the marble surface at the pastry station. The marble was good. She did not say so. Khalil handed her the spec sheet. She read it starting at the top left, moving through it with a steadiness that gave nothing away. Halfway down the second column, she stopped. Vantage Commercial Kitchen Supply, XT Series, 12 units. She read it a second time. In the folder on her phone, the one she had named Vantage and added to for 6 years, 41 items. She knew the date on the memo. She knew the name at the bottom. The paper moved slightly in her hands, just at the corners. "How long have you been working with Vantage?" Her voice was the same as always. Khalil explained. "New contract, all 12 locations, the largest equipment supplier on the East Coast. May I use the restroom?" She went in, locked the door, and opened the Vantage folder. She scrolled to the Food Safety Monitor investigation. An internal memo passed to a journalist, author's name redacted. She had read it before. She read it again. The memo was dated March 2017 from Curtis Hale, VP of Sales. It concerned a thermal pressure anomaly in the XT900 heating element flagged by two regional service technicians. It evaluated two options: voluntary recall of 4,000 units or case-by-case response to reported failures. It assessed the projected costs of each. The word it used was monitoring. Projected recall cost exceeds projected liability exposure. Recommend monitoring and case-by-case response. March 2017. 8 months before a heating element in a Vantage XT900 expelled superheated steam across both her. She held her wrists under cold water for a moment, then dried them, looked at her reflection, and went back out. She set the spec sheet on the counter between them, squarely, like an exhibit. She told him everything, voice even, no rushing. She showed him the memo. She showed him the date. She showed him the name at the bottom. The man who sold you this contract. Curtis Hale. He knew in March of 2017. He decided the cost of not recalling was cheaper than the cost of recalling. He called it monitoring. She set her phone down beside the spec sheet. I was standing in front of an XT900 in November of 2017. She put her hands on the counter. Flat. Scar tissue up under the overhead lights that showed everything without mercy. I have 180 people about to cook on this equipment, Khalil said. He was thinking out loud. Brianna watched his face. She watched the shock move through it, genuine and unguarded. And then she watched what came after the shock. The way his eyes went interior, the slight shift in his jaw, the gaze moving to the spec sheet, and then to a middle distance that had nothing to do with either of them. You're running the numbers, Brianna said. Her voice was flat and precise, the way a diagnosis is. Khalil looked at her. I watched a man do that once. He had the same look, while I was still wearing bandages. She picked up the spec sheet, aligned its edges, and set it back down, centered. You have 180 people about to cook on that equipment across 12 locations. I'll leave that with you. She turned to go. Brianna. She stopped. She did not turn around. Khalil's voice was different, stripped of the professional register entirely. Beaumont, February 13th, 2016. There was a dessert course that night. Compressed Bosc pear, cardamom foam, pulled sugar petals the color of amber. He paused. I have tried to describe it to my pastry team 100 times. No one could recreate it. I thought it was the pear variety. I thought it was the cardamom. I thought it was 100 different things. A silence. I think now it was the hands. Brianna stood still. I never asked who made it, he said. I signed the check and left. That was who I was. The ventilation hoods hung above them without sound. Somewhere down the corridor, a pipe ticked once and was silent. Brianna turned around. The thing on her face was not anger, not forgiveness. It was the expression of someone who has just heard the exact words they did not know they needed to hear and is not certain yet what to do with them. Jerome had his diagnosis that morning, she said quietly. I got the call at 2 in the afternoon. I went back to work at 4. I made that dessert at the end of my shift. I put everything I couldn't say out loud into it. She stopped, began again. I thought nobody noticed. I noticed, Khalil said. I just didn't know whose hands made it, or what those hands were carrying that night. The world runs on invisible hands, not metaphorically, literally. And there are moments, rare, clarifying, almost unbearable, when the window between the person who benefits and the person who pays disappears entirely, and both people are left standing in the same room with nothing left to look at but the truth of what has passed between them with either of them knowing it. This was one of those moments. Two people in an unfinished kitchen in Baltimore with a spec sheet and a memo in 8 years and a February 13th and a dessert that one of them made and one of them ate on the worst night of her life. Brianna walked toward the door, steady the way she did everything. Khalil did not call after her again. He looked at the equipment along the east wall, still in transit crating. Then he picked up the spec sheet, folded it once, and put it in the pocket of his grandmother's apron. He stayed in the kitchen until the light outside changed. He read the food safety monitor investigation from beginning to end, then searched further 3 additional incidents across 3 states, each resolved quietly, each accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement. A line cook in Charlotte, a prep chef in Richmond, a baker in New Jersey. He called his restaurant director at 9 that evening, heard out the pushback, 1 legacy memo, updated product line, a signed NDA. You cannot blow a $2 million contract because one former kitchen employee has a grievance. Khalil said he would call back in the morning. He did not call back in the morning. At 11:47, he called his mother. The phone rang 3 times. She had been sitting up. Baby, why are you calling me at midnight? He did not answer that. He asked instead, Ma, do you remember Mrs. Patterson? Used to run the bakery on Pennsylvania Avenue?
Of course. 30 years. Good woman.
Made a sweet potato pound cake I've never tasted anything like since. What happened to her? A longer pause. Health department shut her down. Something about the equipment, she couldn't afford to fight it. Closed one day and never opened again. That corner's been a check cashing place, going on 12 years now. Khalil looked at the transit crating. He thought about Thames Street. He thought about a woman making pulled sugar petals in amber at 4 in the morning because it was the only language she had left for what she needed to say. He thought about 4 miles between Sandtown, Winchester, and Harbor East, and all the Mrs. Pattersons living inside those 4 miles, and the 25 years he had spent staying on the side where people didn't have to think about any of that. "Ma," he said, "I'll come visit next Sunday." His mother was quiet for a moment, not surprised. Simply quiet in the way of someone who has been waiting long enough that the waiting has become its own form of patience. "I know you will, baby," she said. He called his lawyer at 7 the next morning, pulled the Vantage contract, and he did the structure of Brianna's NDA was an agreement signed under fraudulent concealment enforceable under Maryland law. His lawyer was quiet. If the manufacturer had documented knowledge of the defect for the settlement, the NDA may have been signed in conditions constituting fraud. She may have grounds to challenge it. Find out. Don't ask me why. He called Curtis Hale at 8:15. Hale's voice was warm, calibrated for resistance. "Mr. Vance, one isolated incident from a legacy product line that's been fully redesigned. I don't think one former employee's personal history should drive a decision of this magnitude." Khalil said, "Her name is Brianna Osei. I want you to know I know her name." Silence. "Pull the contract, Curtis." He hung up. The cardboard box cost $4 at the CVS on Eastern Avenue. He assembled it in the parking lot and drove to Thames Street in the early gray blue of an April morning. The sign above Osei's was lit. Through the window, the back kitchen light was on. He knocked. Small, quick footsteps. The door opened. Tobias looked up at him, already dressed for school. The boy's gaze went to Khalil's right hand, to the small dark mark at the base of the index finger, oil that had spat from a hot pan. The kind of mark that only happens when you are cooking for real. Tobias looked at it for a moment, then looked back up at Khalil's face. Something shifted in the boy's expression, barely perceptible, like a door that has been leaning, closed, easing, fractionally open. "Come in," Tobias said. Brianna came from the back kitchen, flower off on her forearm, hair not yet tied. She looked at the box. She led him to the table nearest the window. He set it down, opened it, and stepped back. She read the contract termination first. Formal Vantage notice, signed, dated the previous afternoon, all 12 locations, all installations halted. She set it down and picked up the next document. An email to the Food Safety Monitor journalist, an offer of documentation and on-record cooperation for a full investigation. She read it twice. The third document was from his lawyer, a 2-page assessment of her NDA in light of Vantage's documented concealment. The conclusion was clear: grounds to challenge enforceability under Maryland law. 2 other XT series victims had already been contacted. If Brianna wished to join a coordinated challenge, his firm would provide support at no cost. She read that page 3 times. Tobias had been watching from his corner, backpack still on. Without being asked, he went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water, which he set in front of Khalil. Then he returned to his chair, opened his blue notebook, and began to write. Brianna set the last document down. Her eyes were wet, not spilling, just present, the way water sits at the edge of something that has not yet decided to move.
"You really pulled the contract," she said, every line. "And the lawyer. She found the exception. I just asked her to look."
"This is not an apology," Khalil said. "I don't get to apologize for something I didn't cause directly. But I get to choose what I do now that I know, and I chose. I need time. Not for you, for me and for Tobias. Take all the time you need." He stood. Tobias looked up from his notebook. "Mama," Tobias said, still looking at the page. "Does he know how to cook?" Brianna looked at Khalil. Khalil looked at her. "What do you ask?" Brianna said. "I saw his hand. The mark. From the pan." He picked up his backpack straps. "Chef Augustin had marks like that. You showed me in the picture." He stood up. "I'm going to be late." He went out without the locking back the way children do when they have said exactly what they meant to say. Brianna watched the door close, then looked at the mark on Khalil's right hand. "Yes," she said quietly. "Not only to him, he knows how to cook." 2 weeks passed. Khalil did not contact her. On a Tuesday morning, his phone rang at 7:40. He was in the Harbor East kitchen. He was wearing the apron. "This is Brianna Osei. I'm not coming back as your pastry chef." "I know," Khalil said. "I want to be an independent consulting partner, full creative control. My name on the menu, not in the acknowledgments, on the menu, next to the item. Every contract reviewed by my own lawyer. Osei stays open, Saturday and Sunday mornings. Non-negotiable. Done. All of it." A silence that was not uncomfortable but had weight in it. "Jerome always told me I should be running things instead of making them," Brianna said, almost to herself. "He was right. He was usually right. He sounds like he was." The Food Safety Monitor investigation ran 6 weeks later. Khalil was quoted by name. Brianna O.C. was quoted by name. The first time in 6 years she had spoken publicly about what had happened at Beaumont. Two other XT series victims spoke on record for the first time. The Consumer Product Safety Commission opened a formal inquiry. Vantage Commercial Kitchen Supply halted new XT series installations pending the outcome. Curtis Hale resigned 48 hours after publication. The announcement cited personal reasons. The Harbor East restaurant opened in late September. The dessert program consisted of 6 courses, each named for a neighborhood in Baltimore. The 5th course, compressed boss pear with cardamom foam and pulled sugar work in amber, was lasted in February. Designed by Brianna Ose, a food writer from Baltimore Magazine, wrote that it tasted like someone had put something true into it. The piece ran with Brianna's name in the headline. Khalil read the piece at his desk and did not call her about it. She did not need him to. In March of the following year, Brianna testified before the Maryland General Assembly's Committee on Labor and Employment. She wore her work clothes. When she adjusted the microphone, the overhead lights caught the scar tissue on both forearms. She testified for 40 minutes. Dates, product numbers, incident patterns, the precise language of the memo. When the committee chair asked if she had anything to add, she looked at her hands flat on the table, then looked up. Just that the people who signed the memo went home that night, she said. I'd like the committee to consider what we want the cost of that to be. Tobias sat in the back row in a button-down shirt Brianna had ironed the night before. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood the room. He understood that every person at the long table was listening to his mother. He opened his blue notebook and wrote quickly, keeping up as best he could. 3 months later, Maryland passed amended regulations requiring independent safety certification of commercial kitchen equipment prior to installation. The first such requirement in the state's history. On a Saturday morning in October, a young woman came into OC's at 8:30. She wore a restaurant uniform, and on her left forearm there were small scattered marks, the accumulation of years near open flame and hot oil. In her right hand she carried a single printed page, folded once. She unfolded it on the counter. It was an excerpt from Brianna's testimony before the Maryland General Assembly. Scanned, posted, found by a young cook who was looking for something she could not have named precisely. Ma'am, I work at a restaurant 2 miles from here. They just installed new ovens. I looked up the brand and saw your name in an article, and then I found the testimony. She looked at Brianna steadily. I want to learn pastry. I don't have money for school, but I have time and I am not afraid of heat. Brianna looked at her, looked at the marks on her forearm. Show me your hands. The young woman held them out, reddened at the knuckles, rough at the palms, the irregular record of someone who had not been afraid of heat and had the evidence to prove it. Brianna took them in both of hers. Scar tissue against roughened skin. 2 different kinds of evidence. The same kind of proof. These hands already know how to work in heat, Brianna said. The rest is just learning to make it beautiful. Tobias watched his mother lead the young woman into the back kitchen, where the light was on and the marble was cold and the work was waiting. Then he stood and walked to the open doorway. Fells Point was fully awake. The first light off the Patapsco turning the harbor copper, the cobblestones catching it and holding it. Behind him he could hear his mother's voice, low and even, explaining something about temperature, about patience, about the way sugar behaves when you understand what it needs. Someone came down the sidewalk and slowed as they passed the window. They looked in at the light, at the 2 women working inside. They stood there for a moment, the way Khalil had stood on this same stretch of sidewalk on a February night that had changed, though none of them had known it then, the course of more than one life. Then they moved on, the way people do, the way the city does. Tobias watched them go. Then he went back inside, sat at his table, and wrote the last entry in his blue notebook. He wrote for a long time. When he finished, he closed the cover and looked at what his mother and the young woman were doing in the back kitchen. And he smiled the small, private smile of someone who has understood something and does not need to say it out loud. At the table nearest the window, a man sat with a cup of coffee and a piece of almond cake. He had come in quietly while Tobias was writing. He sat with his back to the room in the way of someone who came to be in the place rather than to be seen in it. The coffee was hot. He drank it while it was hot, which was something he was still learning. He left the money on the table, exact amount plus 20%, and walked out into the October morning without looking back through the window. He did not need to. He knew what was in there. He turned up the collar of his jacket and walked toward the burr, and the morning opened up around him the way mornings do in cities that are still, despite everything, alive. The world runs on invisible hands. Not metaphorically, literally. The bread you ate this morning, the coffee in your cup, somewhere in the chain that produced them, there were hands you did not see and a name you did not know. This is not an accusation. It is simply the truth of how things work, and it applies to all of us equally. The question has never been whether you have benefited from invisible hands. You have. We all have. The question, the one that determines what kind of person you are becoming, rather than what kind you have been, is what you do when the window finally disappears, when you are no longer standing outside looking in, when there is nothing between you and the person on the other side, except the truth of what has passed between you and the choice of what to do next. Khalil Vance answered that question with a cardboard box from a CVS on Eastern Avenue and a phone call to a lawyer at 7 in the morning. Brianna Osi answered it with two scarred hands placed over the hands of a stranger and a sentence that asked nothing in return. Tobias Osi answered it by watching everything, writing it down, and understanding that the things worth recording are never the recipes. They are always the reasons. And somewhere in Baltimore right now, on a Saturday morning when the light off the Patapsco is turning everything copper, someone is standing at a window, looking in at a light, deciding whether to stop. Maybe that someone is you. This story is a work of fiction. Brianna Osi, Khalil Vance, Tobias, Jerome. None of them are real people. Osi's Bakery does not exist on Thames Street, and Vantage Commercial Kitchen Supply is not a real company. But the pattern at the center of this story is real. Every year, tens of thousands of workers are injured in commercial kitchen environments, and a significant portion of those injuries involve equipment that has been flagged internally before the incident occurred. Non-disclosure agreements keep that pattern from becoming visible to the next person who stands in front of the same equipment. The people who sign them are not weak. They are people who need to feed their children and cannot wait years for a legal process to conclude. If you or someone you know has been injured in a workplace accident and pressured to sign an agreement you did not fully understand, the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health can help you understand your rights. Knowledge is the thing no NDA can take from you. This story is for everyone who has ever put something true into their work on a night when they had no other place to put it. I see your hands. Have you ever watched someone work with everything they had and wondered what they were carrying that you couldn't see? Have you ever been the person doing the work in the dark, not knowing whether anyone on the other side of the glass was paying attention? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If you know someone building something in the dark right now, a single parent working before the sun comes up, someone who was pushed out of what they were brilliant at and is starting over, share this story with them. Not because it will fix anything, but because sometimes being seen is the thing that makes it possible to keep going one more day. If this story moved you, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There are more stories coming. This city, this country, this life, full of people doing extraordinary things in rooms no one is looking into. I intend to keep looking. I would like you to keep looking with me. May your hands always find the work they were made for. May someone, somewhere, choose not to look away. Stay kind, stay present, and never be afraid of the dark.